But before we dig into that, because I really want to know how you, when it comes to the creative industry, artificial intelligence tools have begun to disrupt everything, from generative AI that produces images and text, to design assistance, content creation, video production, and so much more. Are these tools friends to the creative industry and creative professionals? Are they tools or are they threats? Today's conversation, we're hoping to dig a little bit deeper with the aim of understanding those opportunities as far as skills and skills development, how to support that investment, and how AI can aid in finding efficiencies, along with tackling some of the challenges that the tech presents. So, let's start with you, Ambassador. Tell me a little bit about your background first.
So, contrary to belief, I actually started off as a technologist, and I still stay true to that today. And I somewhat, was lying on the playing fields of regulation needs to do more. And then I quickly got involved and realized that it's not regulation, that's the answer. And so I sat as an advisor to the African Union for a long time in terms of structuring tech policies, whether it be artificial intelligence, blockchain, quantum computing, data privacy, copyright. So that's been the evolution around that. And today I find myself as the ambassador of the African Union 6 region.
And I mean, it must be such a dynamically changing field. Every week, every other day, we're seeing more technologies come out. How has that been for you to experience that kind of at the forefront as these things change and as the regulations, like you said, need to catch up or even be rewritten?
Well, particularly I love it. I love being on the cutting edge and understanding, where we're headed to. I think what is required from an overall perspective is us understanding all our different policies and allowing ourselves to really streamline them. So, and allowing, for example, a data policy to talk to an AI policy that actually talks to, an entrepreneurship policy or talks to a creative arts industry policy, right? Like everything needs to cohesively sing like an orchestra at the end of the day. Yeah, so I'm particularly excited. I think, there's a lot that we can actually do right now. We have the tools, we have the knowledge, we have the know-how. It's just about how do we harmonize ourselves together. Yeah.
Mr. Admeta.
Yes.
You're also a creative, a writer, a published author.
Yes.
Tell us about how that intersects with your work at Meta.
So I used to be a journalist, trained journalist, wrote for Sunday Times, Mail and Guardian, City Press. Also wrote a book that was eventually longlisted for the Sunday Times Award. But I think just, even in my writing, I've always been fascinated with technology, even though I was primarily like an arts and culture writer. And even in my own reading, I was fascinated with sci-fi. So if you look at Philip K. Dick, for example, who's an author who wrote quite extensively about AI, but he had a fascination between like what's real and what isn't. So I'm not going to bore everyone with the details, but for example, in his novels, you have humans finding out they're robots, or robots suddenly finding out that a part of them is human. And I think I've always just been really interested in that sort of like dichotomy, and I think that's what's so fascinating about AI. And I know we're going to talk about the specifics later on, but the specifics of, is this a tool, is it a threat, what's real, what isn't, how much do you get to impose on yourself, at what point do you get to say, I used a piece of AI and this is mine, or a machine created that. So I think just like intellectually, I've always had those fascinations.
Ambassador, you call yourself the AI mom. So in a general sense, there's a number of tools that are being released and developed every day. I think in the last 2 weeks, ChatGPT released its new kind of image generation tool where we're all making ourselves into little action figures. There's all kinds of things happening. What AI tools would you say are the most kind of prominent or maybe applicable to people in the creative spaces? And how do you think those tools are maybe best applied to the creative industry?
So first and foremost, there's tons of applications out there today. To give you an example, I think when ChatGPT launched itself, within the first month, there was over 600 other startups or other business ideas that then developed just from ChatGPT's launch in the first month itself, right? So that's quite significant. So, it's what actually speaks to you. So, the advice is really just play around with as many different types of technologies as you possibly can. And I know Meta has quite a large range when it comes to that as well. So, what and where should one go is really depicted on what is that storytelling that you want to tell, about yourself. What is that thing that you want to drive home? So, to the point of AI Mom, that really came about, I think about 16 years ago or so quite long, quite old. I do give away my age besides my gray hair. But that was, I was lecturing in a hall full of African women that was involved in machine learning at the time. And given all their different backgrounds, they found it a bit difficult to, address me by my full name. So they're like, what can we call you as a nickname? And that's how it kind of started way back when. When we have to talk about, the tech itself, I think we're seeing it do a lot of crazy things. You go to bed today and you wake up tomorrow and there's a new way of developing content. Okay, so that's something that you can either get fully immersed in and get lost in, or you can really try and say, well, you know what, I just want to use, for example, image generation to enhance my particular article that I've written, as an example. Or I want to particularly use voice-generated, AI voices to enhance, a particular character within the story. Or I want to be able to use AI to, help me really get the finesse so that I can have a bestseller out there. So it's just completely varied at this point in time. And I think I'd be naive if I had to say it's ABCD at this point.
But to that, have you seen any interesting kind of use cases so far on the creative side?
I think there's been lots. So, for example, there's been in KwaZulu-Natal we had the sinkholes that happened a few years ago, and there was an artist that came about and utilized AI to generate images for her fashion line to then sell and tell a story around that. So that was really profound. Because you're kind of doing two things at once. You're utilizing the tech, but you also, baselining it against the story that you want to achieve. There has been also, we've kind of democratized the creative space at the moment to the point that, anyone, anywhere with a phone can be able to have a studio operational, right? You can have a radio station that you want to do. You can go and have a blog post. You can go and start a podcast. So everything. You can do almost everything all at once as one person. So that's the sort of power that we kind of see at this moment. Yeah.
Which fantastically leads me to my next question, because all of us touch Meta's group of apps and platforms every day. Myself this morning was probably from about 7 a.m. Sure. Where I was on many of your platforms. Tell us about how those platforms are integrating AI technology into them and how they kind of support creators.
Okay, sure. I mean, I think I also, just very quickly, I think I take it for granted that not everyone knows what Meta is. They still think it's Facebook. So if you don't know, Meta is the parent company that owns Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, and Threads. Yeah, how we're looking to integrate AI into our family of apps is, I mean, our flagship product or AI offering is Meta AI. So if you go on WhatsApp, if you go on Instagram, if you go on Facebook, there's that little purple circle on your bottom right, and that's Meta AI. And the idea is that it's supposed to be a personal assistant, right? You don't have to leave any of our family of apps. If you want to search something quickly, if you want to generate an image, you're already on the app, and then you can use it. So like I said, it has image generation capabilities. You can chat to it via text. Obviously, it's a text generator as well. But I think some interesting use cases are in Nigeria, for example, like where Meta AI is in the top 10, like in terms of daily active usage globally. And they're using it primarily on WhatsApp. Because as you can tell, like people usually have in Nigeria device sharing, data is a bit more expensive, so people don't want to get off WhatsApp, for example, and go to Google and search something. they'll stay on the app, they'll search for something, and they're using it in group chats as well, which is quite astounding. So for example, we might have a group chat, we might be talking about Arsenal, and we have, we're deciding who the top goal scorer for Arsenal is. You can actually mention Meta AI, invoke it into the group chat, and it won't read any of the other messages, it'll just answer that particular message. So I think, yeah, that's where, we are currently. Number one, people using it to create content, but two, as a personal assistant, and I think number three, as a friend as well. It's something we actively encourage people to use as a friend who sort of knows everything. So if you go on Instagram, if you invoke it anyway, and you look at the prompts it gives you, it'll say stuff like, what should I read today? What should I cook today? Because primarily it's supposed to be a personal assistant that just so happens to know everything about everything.
And I just want to add on that. So I think, from a trajectory of where we headed to, like in the next year or next couple of months, is really, leveraging that to the next level, which is all around, you would have heard AI agents itself. And, that is, let's take for example, I speak to my phone and I say, to the African chatbot or to the Meta chatbot, and I will say, can you actually, transfer X amount to my mom, and it will do it with just a voice prompt. My next command could be voice orientated, saying, can you book me a flight to, this particular conference? Can you then, find me, hotels that are around? In the same breath, you could say, can you rearrange my diary to accommodate this? So it is something that sits as almost a tool that allows you to handle what you need. What it does in the back end is that it's actually handling all of the operational sort of intertwines that are there. So in essence, we hopefully going to see, very soon that it's going to get a lot easier in terms of engaging with the digital world.
And that's such an interesting transition from maybe someone of my generation, millennial, who will go to Google to search for something. But we're seeing even with younger generations and platforms like TikTok as an example, where they use that as a search engine.
Absolutely.
And a communication tool, of course, and spreading news and information. Is that something that you kind of see happening with Meta's AI tools as a search engine also?
It's primarily what people are using it for, like as a search function. Now, I do think, for example, there are ways, we've been able to improve on, the responses it gives you. So it's linked to the web now, whereas initially, so I'm not sure whether people know how AI just in general works, but how the technology works is, before the recent updates is, you essentially type something in, and because it's a large language model, it's based on language, it essentially tries to predict what the next word would be. So if you say, hi, how are you? It scans, from its research. What it's learned is that what you're meant to say in return is, I'm fine, thanks, and you. But what used to happen in the past is that you'd ask it something and it would respond nonsense, or it would hallucinate. And that's just AI across the board. But what's happened recently is just instead of, trying to predict what the next word is, it's thinking cognitively. So you have like deep research functions, you're asking it something and you can like sort of go through the rationale, like thinking what it is it answer. And I think that's been pretty cool. But yeah, people are usually using it primarily as a search function, but I think, very ominous. Yeah, but I think it's a whole lot more than that. I think, just looking at it just as a personal assistant is would be remiss. Like, people are using it as a script writer, people are using it to generate ideas, the entire apps that have been created on AI. So for example, if you saw me have my breakfast outside, like I literally count my calories. So you take a picture and, it tells you how many calories. Someone created that with AI, someone with no coding experience whatsoever. And so, these are some of the use cases we're seeing.
Please tell me that only does that with food.
It only does it with food.
And
Yeah.
not my selfies.
No. It just does it with
If I take a selfie and start counting my calories,
No.
I'm going to show up at your door with questions.
It's just
Ethical questions.
And several questions. Yeah. Ambassador, you were talking a little bit about a few things. One about the technology being able to remove certain barriers to, especially the creative industry, where if the tool is in your hand, you don't necessarily need to be published per se, but you can publish. How do you think these tools and technologies can be used to help grow the creative economy across the continent?
Yeah, so I'll try and blend yours with, one of the sort of thoughts that were given earlier around solutions, and we're probably not doing enough of that. So, I think that we sit at a point where we find that we have, creative chaos that's happening at the moment because we have so many different tools and so many different things, and we can go in so many different directions. But it's all boiling down to the fact of, what is it that you want to drive, right? What is that end goal that you wish to see, right? And that takes some time because that means we as humans, we need to sit with ourselves, we need to understand ourselves, we need to collect our thoughts, and we need to say, what do we honestly want to see for ourselves, in the next 5 to 10 years. But over and above that, you need that guiding overall vision, right? And whether that's coming from a presidency level, whether that's coming from an African Union perspective, whether that's coming, filtered down or being filtered upward from yourself upward is the sort of blend that one needs to see. The sort of tools, that's the question, right, around specific tools. So I've seen AI avatars, that have come about. That's really cool. So it allows, for example, myself to attend at least 4 or 5 different meetings at the same time. But really understanding, how I would probably articulate myself in those different sessions. So it does cross some barriers, for sure. It raises, but the technology is there and it's in its infancy stages. I think other areas that I've seen is obviously the usual, AI sort of chat engagements that you have, be it, Metas or, ChatGPT, Sydney, Bard, Bing, and on we can go. All of that kind of allows you to summarize or give you an idea of a direction, right? Or flow of information. And then it's up to you to then, personalize that. I've also seen, as an example, it being just basically saying words and generating an entire video based on words, okay? So there's various ways that, the applications can be utilized. It is then just baseline again, at the end of the day as to that particular narrative. Yeah.
We might actually have an example of a video like that, I believe.
Ooh, okay.
If that's not available now, we could maybe cue that up at the end of the discussion. But while we're finding that, maybe we could talk about some of the ethics around artificial intelligence and some of those ethical concerns, because there are many, I'm sure, and especially in a context like ours, both here and across the continent. What are some of those ethical concerns that you've come across when it comes to technology, integration, but especially AI?
So I think information, disinformation, and the likes kind of really play a large role. I think we've also seen, for example, the AU commissioner himself, being privy to deepfake. We've also seen journalists, homegrown in South Africa, that have been, affected by that. I think that was about 1.5 years ago or so. And so, that in itself embeds a lot of questions. Someone today can generate a video, an image, a voice, everything that can synthesize who I am, who you are, who every single person out here is. And, how do we know and see authenticity? And this is where, ideas of putting in watermarks become really important. Also putting in a disclaimer that an AI was actually used to generate this content. That's becoming more important. So that's just one example around disinformation, misinformation. I think the second area is around bias, and this is something I'm sure, I know Rolf is particularly, passionate about. But, that's one area. And I think at the end of the day, we may have a list of how these different technologies are being adapted. So for example, for the African skin tone, we know that there's a large, not a particular kindness that's shown from the AI around recognizing, that. But having said that, equally so, we've seen now, that being eradicated. So I've worked with an AI company that has the ability to recognize skin diseases on African skin tone. Game changer. Okay, so at the end of the day, it is really about we can use it to be our friend, or we can use it to be our foe, and that's really the essence of the ethical applications. I'll maybe just give one more example, which is not to do with the creative arts industry, but I think it's a pertinent example anyway. We've had Morocco, as an example, had their flooding about a year ago. And we had a startup that literally 21, 24-year-old, if I'm not mistaken, that developed in that time of the flooding, he developed an AI, a voice-generated app, that allowed for people that were in distress to send a voice note, but also have them like in their local language, right? So obviously that helped. And then having to understand the geolocation, so then it dispatched, the necessary responses or emergency response that was required. And to the point that the Ministry of Morocco actually included that now as part of their standard process. Okay, just from one event of a response. So I think, the reason why I bring that up is really just to illustrate the point that, we have so many ways that we can enter a market, and ethics is definitely a huge sort of grounding point. Ethics isn't something we're born with. It's something we just know inherently, right? Nobody has to teach us right from wrong. I mean, I think there were case studies done with babies where they inherently already know this. So, at the end of the day, it is something we should eat, breathe, and sleep. It should be part of our policies. It should be part of, the work that we're doing. It should be, part of policies that you're creating within each organization. And I know Meta definitely does speak a lot to the ethics.
Yeah, I mean, just maybe to your point about disinformation and the ethics around that. Like, I think, when I think about AI as well, like I think about a hammer, for example. You could use a hammer to fix your cupboard, or you could use it for something more egregious. And you aren't, okay. And I'm just saying, like, for example, like the safeguards we've put in to make sure, our tools can't be used for misinformation, disinformation. So for example, if you generate a piece of content on our platforms, there's a watermark, and if you post it, our algorithms pick up that it's AI content, and it says this was generated using AI. And I think people talk about likeness, for example, quite a bit. If you go into any of our tools and say, generate a picture of black coffee, it won't. Because his image and his likeness is uniquely his, because you open up, the idea of misinformation as soon as you can say, you can generate a public figure's profile. If you ask it for medical or legal information, it'll tell you no, but here are some resources you can have a look at. So just having those like technological guardrails just to make sure people are safe and people are consuming ethically, I think is quite important.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up such a great point about non-creative, but still creative ways to use the technology.
Yeah.
And it's an important thing to think about, not just these tools within the creative economy, but any business that has a creative element, normally which is communications, which can also be used as these tools to kind of make their output more efficient and maybe more relevant. And that's maybe on the friend side. On the foe side, and you bring this up from a legal perspective, because I mean, that's a minefield in itself. Maybe in two angles. One, in terms of where these models are learning from. And the second, in terms of who owns the output and who controls that copyright and what that looks like. Ambassador, how do you think the creators and kind of purveyors of this technology can partner, perhaps, with copyright holders and people like that, and institutions like that, to really safeguard the intellectual property rights of everyone across the world?
Easy question. So I think, from training the data, because let's start with that, because you mentioned that. I'm not a particular fan of how that all started, because it was trained on a lot of pornography videos, by the way. Yeah, whether we like it or not, it's just the realism of life at the moment. You know, having said that, I think we have an opportunity to take every opportunity to partner with whomever is driving a, you know, a just or an ethical narrative, right? So if we had to take, for example, the current scenario and landscape within South Africa, why don't we look at, instead of having the back and forth that was mentioned on the previous panel of the IP and the copyright laws, why don't we specifically go ahead and create a creative arts industry bill? I know Nigeria specifically has one, and I've been involved with that. So, you know, again, it's, you know, how do we take something that is perhaps just a standalone sort of issue, and how do we as an industry go ahead and say, listen, this is the actual regulation that we are looking for, you know, and we're loud enough, we're contributing X to the actual GDP of the country, and this is why we want to go down this narrative, right? So that's from a large sort of viewpoint. If we have to zone in on like a practical, you know, day-to-day example, I think there we're looking at, for example, look for brands that are actually putting out ethics at the forefront of it, right? Or that are looking to kind of spearhead the next phase. So, you know, like Spotify, Meta, you know, a few others that are here today are actually cognitive that those things exist and need to be rechanged, right? So, for example, why not also bring us all together in an industry that says, listen, we're creating or co-creating amongst ourselves a technological platform for all creators, full stop. No one else is going to own it. No one else is going to be part and parcel of that, except us. Because we're the industry, we understand and we know and we recognize what is actually needed, right? Whether it's a combination of artificial intelligence together with blockchain, together with, you know, anything and everything that you can think of, right? Anyway, let me stop there, because I see our chairperson.
I think we're space for questions.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to not take questions for this particular panel, because I do have Lavina and Rob back again for another one. It's on AI, a little bit different, so that we can catch up time, and then we can combine the questions for this and that one at that stage. So I was about to do my announcement. Let's give you a round of applause first. Can I ask you to please just come in front of the table, just so we can get a quick picture, and keep that for future and history. Thank you. Thank you.